Well, good morning. Looks like another exciting day for today. We're glad to see all of you back bright and early this morning. This session will be dealing with freedom of religion or belief from an international perspective. And this, of course, is something that this whole group represents as few places on earth. So we're very grateful to be able to do this in this session. We have a very distinguished set of speakers. One of the things that has been really significant in recent years is the addition of increased focus on the international significance of freedom of religion or belief. And we've seen that in the United States with the International Religious Freedom Act, the Ambassador at Large and his office, and the U.S. Commission represented here by Sandy Jolly. But recently, we've really seen an uptick in focus on these issues, of course, not only in the United Nations, represented by Heiner Bielefeld, but also in international settings with the recent appointment of Ján Figel as Special Envoy for the promotion of rights and for the promotion of freedom of religion or belief outside the EU. Let me just begin by saying a few words as final groups are coming in. Ján Figel is really a very distinguished person. He has served previously as one of the EU commissioners, the Commissioner for Education, Training and Culture. He was the chief negotiator for Slovakia when it was seeking entry into the European Union. He's been the Deputy Prime Minister in his own country, and is someone who brings a great wealth of experience and also a level of real passion to this field. Following him, we'll be hearing from Archbishop Bernardito Auza. He is the permanent representative of the Holy See at the United Nations. He's served in nunciature positions in a number of other countries, including Madagascar, Bulgaria, Albania, and has since 2014 been the representative of the Holy See to the United Nations. We'll then have shorter comments from Heiner Bielefeld, who I don't need to introduce again, the UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion or Belief. And then Sandra Jolly, who was recently appointed to the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. She's had decades of service working in the Las Vegas area. She has been the co-chair of the Las Vegas Public Communications Committee for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But she's had broad experience in other kinds of settings involving human rights and has a great concern for this issue. So we'll go forward in that manner, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. Dr. Figel, Ján Figel, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Cole. Thank you all for not only being here, but creating sort of special community which has meaning and its mission. 23 years is more than a generational effort which has, I'm sure, and I see many, many great fruits, especially young people, because youth, this is our future and hope. But to see mature, knowledgeable, active, engaged young people means even more, means kind of guaranteed hope for future with values and responsibility, because freedom needs responsible people. It will die out or get into chaotic, anarchic conflicting situations if responsibility is not part of the answer. I'm here for the first time, and maybe not the last, but this is not fully in my hands, but I'm encouraged, and I congratulate the university, the school, and the center for all what you did and are doing now. I lost part of my voice, so if you find it somewhere, please tell me or help me. But I'll rather say less and listen more to balance this situation or problem. But dialogue starts with listening. Each serious dialogue starts rather with listening. It's a new momentum, not only because I'm here, but especially because European Union, after 60 years of integration, since 1957, but better to say 1950, Paris Declaration, Schumann's Declaration, and Rome Treaties, now comes to very special topic, freedom of religion. I think it's a response to so many problems we have, and I hope we will get it right, because Europe needs a soul. This is message of Robert Schuman, founding father. I'm just speaking as a son or somebody who likes these inspirational figures like Konrad Adenauer or Alcide de Gasperi, who had much more difficult situation than we have today, but where their position was credible, persistent, based on totally innovative but human approach, not revenge but reconciliation, not conflict but cooperation and united or unity of interests, which came into being gradually. We have opportunity on this symposium to discuss changing nature of religious rights under international law. Freedom of religion or belief is today an established human right, and since the Virginia Bill of Rights, it has been enshrined in numerous human rights documents, including 1948, a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1966, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. I want to tell you that without religious rights and religious freedom, there is no or very limited civic or political freedom. Religious freedom is a litmus test of all human rights because it's linked with inner freedom of human person. It's linked with freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, of course of conviction, and without that there are no real political or civic rights. In my country, small Slovakia, but beautiful and important, now first time ever we are in charge of EU Council, so small country conducts the orchestra. And in our country, 25th of March is celebrated as the Day of Human Rights because that day, 1988, communist regime oppressed the very peaceful special demonstration, manifestation, people claiming their rights for their claims for civic and religious rights. So it was done together. It was a very logical connection, and we reminded and remember and try to build up on that. So freedom of religion or belief is not something extra, but it's the core of basic fundamental human rights in a strict sense. Article 18 of the United Nations Universal Declaration protects theistic, non-theistic and atheistic beliefs, as also the right not to profess religion or belief. European Court of Human Rights, which is also very special because there is compulsory, obligatory jurisdiction of one single continental court over Council of Euro member states and assist citizens according to the convention from 1950 to protect as well freedom of religion. Many times liberals argue that this point or article or principle is privileging homo religiosus. It's not. If we understand it correctly, it promotes humanity, fairness, freedom for all. But again, freedom for all means responsibility of all, not only of some. some time. This approach should lead secular and religious humanists, whether Christian or non-Christian, to common understanding that if there is first and basic value, it's human dignity, and we should meet there. I'm former leader of Christian Democrats, so for me this was and this is the first value, because human dignity is the objective, the road towards, and the criterion for any policy in any area, whether we speak about social, economic, financial, environmental, security. Not maybe human dignity, not compromised, but seriously respected. I'm the first envoy, and I hope there will be the second and the third, and it will start as continuous action of European Union, now of 28, maybe then 27. I don't want to speak too much about future, but about momentum, because I think that Brexit invites us to rethink some of the issues, and especially to do what was not done or to bring what was missing. And why I mentioned Schuman? Because any community without deeper sense of belonging, without fairness, without common horizon will not last. And that's why Europa braucht eine Seele, or Europe besoin une âme. Without that, euro, money, business, geography is not enough for human unity. It was a special occasion. My nomination was announced in Rome, in Vatican, because European Union major leaders, 3 presidents went there to give a Charlemagne Prize, which is taken as the highest European prize, to Pope Francis, which is not usual, because his actions are now so credible, so visible, so understandable, that it's a reasonable decision, but also a good momentum for European Union that notice and respects this contribution. And because they didn't want to be there just one-sided or expressing gratitude, it was also commitment to do more for religious freedom. And that's why announcement of the first ever EU Special Envoy was made in Rome in May at the celebration of Schumann's Day, European Day. I think it's something what we should be fully aware, because not all, or if you read, there was one special ironic commentary in The Economist saying that 3 Catholics went to see the head of Catholics and to announce that another Catholic from small Slovakia will care about Catholics in the world. This was The Economist. I simplified a bit the commentary. 1957, 6 prime ministers signed Rome treaties establishing European communities, but this was not for Christians or Italians or for Catholics. It was for all, and it is for all. My nomination is not for Christians only, it's for all, because either there is freedom for all, or it's not a freedom in full sense, yeah? Either solidarity is genuine and universal, or it's fractional and it's not solidarity. And I can say a lot about it, coming from post-communist Czechoslovakia, or most of my time I lived under totalitarian regime, without real freedom, with development, but not development and freedom. It's not sustainable, it's against humanity. So why I dwell on this is because my role is to help all, and because it came in a special time. In February, European Parliament adopted a resolution on mass murdering of religious and ethnic minorities at the Middle East on the territories dominated by ISIS, Daesh. And it specifically, or in full sense, labels, denounce these crimes as not only war crimes or crimes against humanity, but as crimes of crime of crimes, which means as a genocide. And for genocide, there is a very concrete instrument, a convention from 1948. And within this resolution, which was strong and is a base for action, not for just the past, in one of the articles, they request European Union to establish post of special representative for religious freedom in the world. So somehow I feel that bloodshed or martyrdom at the Middle East, especially in Syria and Iraq, helps to wake up at least some politicians and to do something more than we did in the past, I hope. And we should, of course, do not only comment or describe this, because it's very important for people on a daily basis. I must say also, historically, first time in 2000 years, Patriarch of Rome and Patriarch of Moscow has met in February on Cuba. I think because martyrdom at the Middle East, it has to provoke us for brotherhood, for action, for something meaningful. And I must say that we are not so keen to do more than to at least recognize what is going on there. So practically I want to, and I will work closely with European Union member states, of course with Commission and its services, with European Diplomatic Service, we call it EAS, European External Action Service, and non-governmental organizations, civil society, where we can and we should put more stress on religious freedom within our international cooperation, bilateral or multilateral. European Union is the largest aid within the international assistance, but we need to care more about freedom of religion and to promote good instruments to make freedom of religion visible and credible part of our policies outside. There is a special instrument, for example, European program called European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights. And it has a volume of 1.4 billion euro incoming or current 7 years of budgetary perspective. Of course, my role is outside, but I will report inside of the Union because according to Article 17, for the first time in these 60 years of European history, EU not only recognizes contribution of churches and religious communities, but offers regular, transparent dialogue with them. And this dialogue is regularly organized, and we will report and mobilize, inform European partners about the situations, actions abroad. Religious leaders are our key partners, not only states, not only organizations, but leaders as well, because in many countries they have bigger influence and authority than many politicians. And when we speak about freedom of religion, we should immediately understand that it is also about the responsibility of religious leaders, religious communities, engagement of these communities, because that's the sense of freedom. For example, next on Sunday I travel to Jordan, and there is composition of many important meetings, not only political, but also religious, civic, and we want to promote culture of dialogue, culture of responsibility, togetherness, because it's important to eliminate space for fundamentalists, for extremists. I already met many important partners, or this is, for example, maybe you know him, Gregorius III, Laham, Patriarch from Damascus, who is the leader of Melkite Greek or Byzantine Catholic Church. This is His Holiness Mor Ignatius Ephraim. He's also from Syria. He's Supreme Leader of Universal Syriac Orthodox Church. Maybe not. Also this one, Yunan, Patriarch from Syria, is Catholic. And this is Bishop Anba Gabriel, Coptic Bishop from Egypt. Coptic. and the man who was rewarded, Pope Francis. We met in August recently. Why I mention it? Because it's important to work with all, with many. I still have one recent meeting in Brussels with the Dalai Lama, who came to Brussels this month, should visit, for example, Czech Republic, Slovakia as well. Because we need to speak to these leaders. On one side for the inspiration, on the other side for motivation to act, to do something different than was done until now. And why the title of my presentation was about genocide? Because I think that we can speak about many ways, and lectures yesterday or today, debates, discovers problems in different regions, different countries, whether with the blasphemy legislation or anti-conversion laws, discrimination on daily basis, but crime of crimes, genocide against religious minorities is a fact. I think this is my opinion, and I'm not the only one to say this. You know this picture maybe. On Saturday, October 1st, was precisely 70 years of the verdict of Nuremberg, when we have been able, under the motto "Never Again," to denounce, to put to justice, and to do something for a different world, for different future of generations. We are here right after this week, October 1st. What happened this year, for example, is that the German Bundestag recently adopted a resolution denouncing Armenian killings in 1915, 1916, and labeling them as a genocide. And they got very harsh reaction from Turkey. It was not appropriate, but also not surprising. Truth and justice vis-à-vis the past, whether recent or deeper, is more important for future than for the victims or for the past, because how can we help people after 100 years? But I mentioned it as a paradoxical situation when it takes a century to label a fact as a real top crime of humanity. Of course, we should be concrete of perpetrators and to do something against. 100 years. But since then, we had many occasions. Nazi concentration camps, Soviet gulags, genocides in Cambodia, in Rwanda, in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And we repeat again, never again. And it's again and again. And now, maybe for the first time, in full sense of what I say now, we see it by eyes. Not we can hear or get some testimonies, but perpetrators of crimes from ISIS, they put it online, they broadcast killing, beheading of people, they put it on social networks immediately. So what happened since it started in 2014, this bloody oppression and unprecedented persecution of Christians, Yazidis, Shia Muslims, Kakais, and other religious and ethnic minorities on the ISIS territories, is that at least some parliaments said, no, it's not acceptable, we should do something. And it started in January in the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, which is very good because Council of Europe covers the whole continent. Then early February, European Parliament, I have a text here, if needed then, said probably the strongest words in the Parliament against genocide. And I'm glad that European Parliament was able to do it. In March, US Congress and US State Administration, John Kerry, labeled these crimes as a genocide. Then in April, it was British Parliament, and I think in May, Australian. I hope it's not the full list. I know about, and I try to inspire or persuade some colleagues, friends in Austria. Maybe some other parliaments will say something similar, because it's our responsibility. We are not viewers here. We are not visitors on this earth and in this time. So question is whether century from, because it's 100 years since 1916, the first genocidal type of murdering on European soil, and then 2016, which is current year, will end as a century of genocide or will continue. Because it is not the same. It is question for us. It's not question for our children. We have adopted and we should respect Convention on Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. Prevention. So if not now, then when? If not us, then who? United Nations were not created to exist, but to help international peace, rule of law, humanity to prevail. Elie Wiesel said that indifference is a sister of evil. I would enlarge his true idea and great expression, that fear and indifference are siblings. And the easiest governance over people, dominance of people, is where fears and indifference prevail. And I hope and I see and I'm sure that we must do our utmost that humanity and solidarity prevail over fear and indifference. Democracy and culture of human dignity needs brave and courageous citizens. My visit here or participation here, my even mission, is a fruit of martyrdom. It didn't come because bureaucrats wanted to have an additional post. I am not bureaucrat. I have a name, Ján Figel, which belonged to my uncle who disappeared by secret services in the 1950s in Czechoslovakia. We don't know where he's buried. Liquidation of people was the way how to solve problems. Jest člověk, jest problema. Niet člověka, niet problema. This was inhuman. And it was a message from a man who studied at the seminary in Tiflis. Stalin, I'm in Stalin now. Reasonable solidarity is needed. It's not expensive. It pays back. Reasonable solidarity pays back. Egoism is expensive. Egoism is very, very expensive. And if we don't care, we pay price as well. The crisis in Europe is also partly because we acted slowly and superficially. Freedom is a very special gift. It invites us towards responsibility for freedom. This is a mature response. Whether the world in the 21st century is to be a better place, better space for living, depends on us. And as I said, it will be better if there will be more solidarity and more humanity. Dividing line is not going, in current and future world, will not go between cultures and religions and nations, civilizations. I mentioned already one who studied theology, and he was one of the most anti-human or inhuman dictators in the history, Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin. Dividing line is going through us, through our communities. On one side, there is fanaticism of any sort, ideological, political, ethnic, religious, atheist. On the other side, there is humanity, respect to diversity and unity, equal dignity of all human persons. I think and I hope that also this great symposium here in Provo and Washington will give voice to voiceless and help to defenseless. I mean people who suffered from genocidal persecution. I want to thank you for promoting of dignity of human persons and ethic of responsibility. Thank you very much. And with your permission, there is still one last message to those who are voiceless in a way. Because I expected a bit more from September General Assembly, I must say, of the United Nations. I have a short video from one of organizations with their permission, which is a testimony of Father Douglas from Erbil, from Iraq.
We need someone to help us start. So we need a technical person to help us start. I promise they'd be right here.
Oh, no.
Were you playing the video off of?
No.
Is there a video?
Okay, we can do it after another speech.
Yeah.
It's coming?
No, it's just-
Is it on the slide?
he's guilty.
Move down, right here?
Yeah.
Are we gonna hook this into the tech podium here, or?
Elizabeth, where is it?
Where is the video?
In her post.
No, she's got it on. She transferred it.
I know that
Okay, yeah.
someone pulled it up from the email a few minutes ago before we started the session.
Sorry. Yeah, we said
It was on email.
it's okay. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, okay,
Over here.
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Technology is wonderful. Technology is wonderful.
Everything changed in August 6, 2014, when my town received 75,000 displaced Christian people in one day. Before 2003, my people, we were around 2 million Christian in Iraq. Now, less than 200,000. To be priest in Baghdad is really suicide mission. There is a prayer in our liturgy in the end of the Mass. That one actually, I believe, almost the priest from diocese in Baghdad, we really prayed that with really deeply, more than the others. When they finish the Mass, the priest come to the altar and he kiss the altar. And he's saying, the altar, the tomb of Jesus Christ. I'm saying to you goodbye because I don't know if I'm going to celebrate my Mass again or not, and leave the altar. Usually, and I know that feeling many, many times, sometimes suffering during our day more harder to be killed itself. It's really suicide mission. Many people ask me this question, what we can do to help our brothers and sisters. First, speak out that what happened to our people as a genocide. Second, take any moment, any chance to talk with government, to anyone related with the government, with organization. Those people, they need help, so you can do a lot. But please, don't be late. Time is running, and we are losing our people.
distinguished scholars and participants in this symposium, fellow panelists, dear ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank His Excellency Ján Figel for this interview of Father Douglas Albazi. Last April 27 to 29, the Holy Submission to the UN organized a huge event, probably around 500, 600 people attended at the Economic and Social Council chamber at the UN on stopping the violations of religious freedom in the Middle East, especially in northern Iraq and parts of Syria. And he was one of our speakers, and he brought along with him the clothes he wore while he was tortured for many weeks and soaked with blood, etc., etc. So thank you, Ján, for this really great testimony of these people who are under severe forms of persecution. So, and that's why the protection of the freedom of belief or religion is one of the most urgent tasks of the international community today. And of course, not only of the international community, but even and above all, of each one of us. Why? Because every study, every survey tells us that throughout the world, practically, freedom of religion or belief has entered into a period of serious decline. That is not a pessimistic assessment. I think it is a realistic one. Among the many studies and surveys that we could read and we could look into in order to see what is really happening on religious freedom in the world today, of course, there are some that are very, you might say, important. Of course, we have the interim report, the 2016 interim report of Mr. Heiner, Professor Heiner Bielefeld here, the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief. And then we have the US Commission on International Religious Freedom in the World, and its 2016 report. And I would like to bring your attention also to even a much bigger report on the situation of religious freedom in the world, which is authored by the PayPal Foundation Aid to the Church in Need, not only because, we might say, not only because of its size, but also because of its very detailed reporting using experts and advocates on the ground. And above all, it covers 196 countries in the world. That means all the countries in the world, bigger than what the UN covers with 193 member countries. The UN Commission report covers primarily 31 countries and some countries in 2 different regions. Countries which are anyway considered to be where the religious, the curtailment and the violations of freedom of religion or belief are severely curtailed. There you will see the enumeration of those countries where systematic, ongoing, and egregious violations of freedom of religion or belief, and also we include in that the freedom of expression and free speech. The 2016 report of Professor Bielefeld gives us really the keynote ideas of what's happening to the world of religious freedom today. I would like to point out that there is a general thread running through it, and that is that violations of religious freedom or belief, and without conscience and thought and free speech, exceed what we see on television. They exceed what we read on the newspapers, or they exceed even in many of the reports and studies on this theme. They are not only terrorism, religious vigilantism, mass and individual killings, forcible deportations, ethnic cleansing, the rape and kidnapping of women and girls and selling them to slavery, disappearances, and all these very obvious violations of religious freedom. There are also those which are less visible, that probably you could only read in the most specialized magazines or in really some very, very active advocacy groups on the grassroots level, and sometimes these news they don't get to CNN or Fox News. But these are violations of religious freedom of belief which are as insidious as the explicit, more visible ones. They are usually what we call soft violations, probably, but they are, because they are many times based on laws supported by states or governments, and also by subsidiary bodies with implicit support of states and governments. You have heard of these because you are all specialized. You have the anti-apostasy, all kinds of anti-apostasy laws, which really went into the heart of freedom of religion, and that is the freedom to change one's religion. Anti-apostasy laws, of course, you will get beheaded in some countries if you change religion. And there are those laws which are more or less anti-proselytism laws, and then there are those laws which are more known to all of us, the anti-blasphemy laws, because there have been really egregious cases tied to that, and above all, it is tied to what we called extrajudicial or summary killings. It is enough to accuse somebody of being blasphemous, and then, you could execute him or her, or you could put punishments beyond what the law even prescribes. So these reports that I have just mentioned really give us a big picture and a clear illustration how these assaults have been and are happening in the world even as we speak. These are assaults to freedom of religion and culture, thought and conscience and belief, not only perpetrated by what we call non-state actors. Also, they have become stars recently. But even more sadly, these are also supported by state laws and practices, and even deep-seated cultures and national identities. This is probably where the insidiousness of the violations of the freedom of religion are found. There are several reasons, really, why the freedom of religion or belief is being violated in so many ways. If you read the report, and if you read all the scholarly writings that there are, these are really a product of reflections from experiences on the ground. Many of you here work on the ground, on the grassroots level, where, as Mr. Ján Figel also mentioned, where the fight is really fought, where the axe are really down, where advocacy is really effective. That is why religious leaders have this great responsibility, not only to promote religious freedom, but above all, to inject and instill in everybody who has a religion or not, the importance of being responsible in the exercise of this freedom. You can easily, of course, say that at the UN, I would like to make a digression here, probably 12 or more years ago, the UN never spoke of religion. It was almost a taboo. The UN doesn't to religion. But if you go to the UN now, especially in the last 2 years, almost in every big debate, even at the Security Council, there is always that element of religion. There are many reasons why religion has become mainstream in a sense, and I would just be very brief on that. My experience, I am not a scholar, but I work there. As Mr. Willifield said, I'm not in the UN. I'm in the UN, but not of the UN. So I kind of daily have this contact and experience of how religion is being treated at the United Nations and in other international fora. I think one of the two, there are really two, I think, basic reasons why religion has become so much treated and has become really a subject of discussion at the level of the United Nations and multilateral diplomacy. I think one of them was the experience of the last 15, 16 years. We had the Millennium Development Goals, and now we have the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. You know, during the Millennium Development Goals, of course, even before that, there has been a greater recognition. Although before, you know, especially specialized institutions or even states would hardly, or would rather, or are hesitant, or would rather not recognize the very important role of faith-based organizations and religious institutions in human development. You know, we are here talking about development, the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. And there you see that if you really work and look into how these results are being obtained in the practical local level, then you can see how much of these faith-based organizations, as well as other civic society organizations, really do in order to promote development. I think that's one reason. Many of the fora, many of the discussions I participated in was about that. The other side of that is negative in a sense. Religion has been seen or is seen as a very important element in war and conflict. And that is why if you want to solve this war and conflict, we might as well bring in religion so that we could discuss this matter with religious leaders, with religions themselves. In a sense, the religion got into the room from the wrong door, we might say, a rather negative one, but let's take it like that. Of course, at the level of debates and statements of countries and regions, religion in itself has nothing to do with all these violent acts, has nothing to do with fundamentalists, terrorists, and radical extremists, etc., etc. One of the principles there that you could find in the Catholic teaching, especially in a landmark document of the Second Vatican Council called Dignitatis Humanae, that is the human dignity, and also found in the report of Dr. Bielefeld, is that freedom of religion or belief is not attributed to religion or belief itself. We don't respect freedom of religion or belief because of religion. We respect freedom of belief or religion because of the human person, because of the basic and equal dignity of everyone, the freedom to believe what he or she considers to be the truth. So I think, dear friends, these are how we see religion, more or less, at the United Nations and the international field. Now, given my time, I would just like to focus on what the Catholic Church thinks about religious freedom or belief. You know, just like every institution, we might say, every reality that has lived across millennia, there have, of course, been evolution also on this thinking. The actual thinking of the Catholic Church is basically found the basis, even Pope Francis, who has said so many things about freedom of religion and belief, then if you go deeper into his thoughts, then you could conduct them, all of them, to this document I just mentioned, Dignitatis Humanae, the Latin for human dignity, which is the decree of the Catholic Church on religious freedom. I would just like to break it down as fast as I could into 5 principles, really, in which our belief, our conviction on the freedom of religion or belief is based. First of all, I just mentioned it, human dignity. The dignity of the human person that must be respected in every way. It is an absolute value that we must respect. The human being is a seeker of truth, especially about the ultimate meaning of life. We ask who we are, We ask where we come from. We ask why we are here. We ask where we are going. And all these, all these things, imply truth. And because of that, and everybody finds the truth without being forced, and because of that, we have to respect each one according to his or her belief. The second comes from this, that is, freedom begins with this immunity from coercion in civil society. So the state, therefore, has the right to protect, to respect, above all, to protect and to fulfill this religious freedom. And third, I would just like to mention that this man is a social nature. You remember the description of Socrates, the definition of Socrates of the human person as a social animal. So this freedom of religion is not only something inside or in the mind or in the heart of a person, but it needs social expression. And that is why religious freedom of belief includes, as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights say, it includes the freedom to worship together with others. So those are really our fundamental principles. And of course, I would like to add a fourth, and that is this, although this religious freedom is fundamental, inalienable, it is also exercised in relation to other people's inalienable fundamental human rights. And that is where the responsibility to exercise this freedom in a way that it would not hurt other people's fundamental freedom. I would just like to conclude by just citing the Pope. The Pope has been everywhere. He just came back from Azerbaijan, and from Georgia, where it is mainly almost everybody Orthodox, and Azerbaijan almost everybody Muslim, Shiite. So in a sense, the trip of the Pope was really about interreligious dialogue and promoting harmony among religious people. I would like to conclude my reflection by quoting the Pope. He said how he describes and understands religious freedom, and equally important, what is the purpose of this religious freedom. The Pope says that religious freedom is a shared space, an atmosphere of respect and cooperation that must be built with everyone's participation, even those who have no religious convictions. And then he outlines two attitudes which can be especially helpful in advancing together religious freedom. It is really lived religious freedom and not just conceptual or ideal religious freedom. He said that the first attitude is that of regarding everybody around us not as enemies, not as rivals, but as brothers and sisters. When a person is secure in his or her belief, he has no need to impose by force or by other means that belief. All of us believe that truth has a way of imposing itself. The second attitude, which fosters the promotion of religious freedom, is the work we do together for the service of humanity, for the common good. Whenever adherence to a specific religious tradition gives birth to service that shows conviction and concern for the whole of society, without making distinctions, then there to exist an authentic and mature living out of religious freedom. One of the threads, the golden threads of all the Holy Father's speeches is really the question of dialogue, of encounter, of not building walls, as he said, the dialogue is the essential characteristic of a fundamentalist is monologue. And so dialogue should also be the antidote to his being a monologue, a fan of the monologue, we might say. Dialogue, and that's where here, dialogue, make this dialogue fruitful and lived so that it would really redound to the good of us all. Thank you very much.
As you all know, we live in difficult times, and the Archbishop at the beginning of his speech, gave also some examples of how dire the situation of freedom of religion or belief is. It seems to be worsening in many parts of the world. At the same time, we are currently witnessing the fragility of international, supranational institutions like never before in the last decades. This includes the EU. Ján Figel mentioned also the Brexit. It includes the Council of Europe. There is currently also a trend in many member states, especially driven by populist movements, to pull out of the Human Rights Convention. And obviously the United Nations. The UN is in bad shape. You all know it. Let's say it, let's face it, in very bad shape. Realizing that, witnessing the fragility, experiencing the fragility of all these institutions on which we had based our hope, brings the danger that people become cynical, resigned, fatalism, and the end result of fatalism is usually cynicism. So I think it's all the more important that we need to see some silver linings, some good stories, and not the Hollywood type of good stories. I'm not a believer in Hollywood. Because, you know the happy end, and after the happy end, after all this emotional climate, okay, forget it. There's not much sustainability. It's not the Hollywood type of good messages, but very sober, very common sense-based good messages. Let me just give you two examples from the UN. So it was one of those moments when the Baha'i representative to the United Nations took the floor and spoke on behalf of Shia Muslims. She addressed the issue of an increasing Shia persecution. And this is really amazing. I think you all know how much the Baha'is suffer from what's happening in Iran under the auspices of Shia theocracy. And just imagine, what that means. Now, the Baha'i representative, having such a big soul, such a big heart, that she really makes a case on behalf of Shias, who increasingly suffer discrimination, persecution in many parts of the world. Amazing. It was one of the moments where you actually felt diplomats listen. Usually there's no culture of listening in the UN. Yeah. I see the Archbishop smiling. Yeah. So it's difficult. It's difficult to listen in the UN. Yeah. All these short speeches read out and always the time ticking. It's really difficult. But there are moments, and this was one of those moments when really silence fell. Everyone was attentively listening. Or another example. Only last March, Christian Solidarity Worldwide and the British Humanists had a number of side events in Geneva. The British Humanists, okay, they are more or less atheistic. Yeah? I would say unlikely partners, an unlikely alliance, but actually they had come together by working on very practical cases, including a rather famous case in Indonesia that really had brought them together. Okay, we need specialization on human rights. We need the special competencies also on FORB and other human rights. But at the same time, we have to make sure that specialization does not lead to further fragmentation. Fragmentation is a huge danger currently in human rights. And that's why I sometimes like to see that people step a little bit out of the box and also outside of the usually boundaries or the usual division of labor. And the usual division of labor is faith-based organizations defend freedom of religion, secular institutions defend freedom of expression. Good. Yeah, this division of labor, has some advantages. I'm not against it. But maybe it's important sometimes really to turn things around, have a sort of cross-boundary approach. And the good news again is it happens. It happens. So there are also atheists coming on board of freedom of religion, and that's important to see freedom of religion, I believe, is not a clientelistic approach. So atheists, humanists coming on board, I mean, they bear witness to the wide application of that human right. It's a human right after all. At the same time, theologians, as we heard yesterday, can provide a very profound and interesting reading of freedom of expression, basing it on the logos. And yeah, so really, I mean, giving also a new depth to freedom of expression. So, and this is, I think it's very important to sometimes cross the boundaries without, of course, giving up the specialization needed. So let me come to my concluding sentences. I'm not preaching an easy optimism. As I said, I don't believe in Hollywood. And maybe the question is not at all about being optimistic or being pessimistic. I'm sometimes pretty pessimistic. We have to be realistic. But the point is we cannot afford to become fatalistic. Yeah, so that's not an easy optimism. It's not a prognostic optimism. We cannot afford to become fatalistic and in the end cynical, because that would be a betrayal of human dignity. And we just heard human dignity, I mean, it's in the title of the Catholic Church's most important document on freedom of religion, or Dignitatis Humanae. But freedom of human dignity is also, I mean, the beginning of the UDHR. The very first words are recognition of the inherent dignity of all human beings, of all members of the human family, recognition of the inherent dignity of all members of the human family, providing the basis for peace and justice in the world. So, I mean, this is our calling. Thank you very much.
My dear friends, and I feel like I have made some really wonderful and dear friends here today. I would like to begin by thanking Cole Durham and this entire BYU religious freedom family. They have mentored and inspired all of us, and I'm personally deeply indebted to that personal mentoring and inspiration on my part, so thank you. As a very recent and a very green member of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, I have been invited to discuss this preeminent right of religious liberty and the organization with which I now serve. I'd like to do this by asking and answering 3 questions. What is religious freedom? Actually, I'm going to make that 2 questions, because this first question, we've been here for 2 days. I think we've covered it adequately. So I'm going to go on to question number 2. What is USERF and how did it come to be? The United States Commission on International Religious Freedom is referred to, for simplicity, as USERF. How and why was this body conceived? Between the 2 world wars that defined our prior century, an unprecedented enemy of freedom arose. Totalitarianism, with its most evil incarnation, the Holocaust. It was out of the ashes of the Shoah that nations united to establish this 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we've heard so much about. As consequential as this document was, however, nations fell gravely short of commitments and expectations. And in response and over time, the US foreign policy establishment decided that religious freedom merited a seat at the table with economic and security concerns and deserved to be among the central considerations of foreign policy. And the reason is a clear one. A country's interests cannot be readily separated from its values. And because those values directly reflect core identities, such separation is hard to achieve, let alone desirable to pursue. And so in 1998, 50 years after that Universal Declaration, the Congress of the United States passed and the President signed into law an act that created the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Our mandate is to monitor religious freedom worldwide using international standards, and then to make independent policy recommendations to the President of the United States, to the Secretary of State, and to Congress. Our work is led by 9 bipartisan private sector commissioners. We come from all religions, we come from all ethnicities. We're men, we're women, we're conservative, we're liberal. About the only thing we have in common is we all have lots of opinions that we like to share. We are appointed by the White House and through Congress. I might mention that our new chairman is Thomas J. Reese, who is a journalist and Jesuit priest and doing a really fine job of leading a very, what I'm hoping is a progressive agenda for our commission. We are supported with 13 full-time staff, and we work in collaboration to a certain degree with the State Department because the ambassador at large, David Saperstein, is a 10th member, ex officio member of our commission. Our work focuses largely on states that meet established standards for countries of particular concern, or as Cole refers to them, countries of particular opportunity. Those whose governments engage in or tolerate the standard that we've heard, systematic, ongoing, egregious violations of religious freedom. This is a copy of our latest report that was issued by the former commission. It comes out every May. It details in a tiered fashion the most to the least egregious violations of religious freedom, and then offers recommendations to them. One question that is often posed, and I'll take a minute and address this quickly, is why is the United States not covered by the work of USERF? And I'd just like to simply respond to that by saying it is just a matter of mandate, just as our special envoy here concentrates on external relationships outside the EU and not within it. So the US Commission's mandate is a very specific one, focusing exclusively on freedom of religion abroad. And this is not because the domestic concerns and violations are not real, it's just that we are created to guide foreign policy. In addition to the primary work of our annual report, we are often tasked with requested special projects. I won't go into this, but this is the latest one. It's called Barriers to Protection. It represents 2 years of research and was recently published with the treatment of asylum seekers in expedited removal proceedings, and we're hoping that it makes a really big improvement in some of the deficiencies of our asylum process. Fact sheets, press releases, op-eds, headline blasts are issued on a daily basis, all supporting our mission. The thing that has been probably the most gratifying part of this job for me is meeting with groups and individuals who come in on a regular basis, government, religious, NGO leaders, and share with us their special concerns from their country or their religion, and I've thoroughly enjoyed being part of that process. Both staff and commissioners travel extensively. I was going to talk a little bit about our trip to Burma, but we had a delegation that recently returned from that, and we're preparing shortly for fact-finding missions to Saudi Arabia and Central African Republic, a trip that I'm anticipating next month, immunizations notwithstanding. And lastly, the third question I'd like to ask is, what are some of the special issues and projects that YouSurf is currently working to advance? We were very proud of our participation in the establishment of the International Panel of Parliamentarians that you've heard a little bit about while we've been here. In just 2 short years, this group of parliamentarians has grown not just numerically, but in international stature and influence. And I think it's really fitting to note here the guiding hand of this center, along with the International Consortium for Law and Religious Studies in Milan, of which Cole was president until last month, how they played a significant role, along with YouSurf and many individuals, in promoting and building this very effective organization. Cole's guiding hand was essential in providing the venue at Oxford, out of which this platform gathered vision and shape. Out of time, I think I'll skip this part, but let me just say one thing. I just came back from Berlin of a 4-day conference with the IPP, and it's just like it is here. You sit down and you meet and you talk and you commiserate with people who are so committed and so courageous and so generous. This is a very generous religious freedom community. I'm so impressed. The highlight for me was the opportunity to meet people, to listen to the Rohingya Muslim who was denied re-election to his seat in parliament because of his religion, to hug Christian parliamentarian from Pakistan who's been advocating for minority rights in her country for 14 years, is currently working on issues of forced conversion. And then to learn from the member of the Iraqi parliament who was so impressive. She represents her Yazidi people so beautifully. And we learned from her as she explained her religion as ancient and private. She is working in collaboration with many others to buy these enslaved Yazidi people out of the clutches of ISIS, one by one. That was very touching. In addition to IPP, we're currently formulating a couple of new projects regarding prisoners of conscience, blasphemy laws. We're working on an op-ed right now for global refugee crisis. But can I conclude with my last few minutes about the interest and passion that I bring to this commission, that I bring with me, and that is, I think, a subject that is very compatible with our theme here today of religious rights in a pluralistic world. I am interested in a deeper look into the intersection of women's rights and concerns and that of religious freedom. And I'm referring specifically here to issues like the denial of education to women and girls and access to the public square, female genital mutilation and cutting, honor violence, forced conversion, forced marriage, child marriage. This is just a sampling, my friends, of the far-ranging, complex array of issues converging around the nexus of human rights, religion, and gender. And this contemporary struggle for dignity, justice, and equality that women are struggling to achieve in far too many regions of the world today. Behind each of these practices are powerful, embedded, ideological, traditional, and theological beliefs and interpretations. Here's a quote from one of my favorite religious historians, Karen Armstrong, quote, "Religion is not just about believing things. It is a moral ascetic, an ethereal alchemy. It is about behaving in a way that changes your intimations of holiness and sacredness." This is a profound concept, that intimations and the behaviors that come from them are defining and consequential in the everyday lives of people, men and women. And I'm not talking scripture and verse, but the lived reality that is created and passed down and inherited by these entrenched and accepted ideologies. Many of the atrocities that I just mentioned, and they are atrocities that put literally hundreds of millions of women at risk, are influenced by a reading of religion that empowers men in a way that it does not empower women. And I argue, and I hope decisively so, that the moral and legal principles set forth in that 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as the body of international law that has come from it, will be used to oppose oppression in all its forms, even the ones that seem like the air we breathe, the patriarchal restrictions that are placed on so many in this world. And that the issues of the rights and concerns of women and the rubric of religious freedom will be inseparably bound together. The home, the church, the community, my friends, should not be the most dangerous place of all for women and girls. And I just need to conclude by mentioning Mr. Bielefeld and giving him a real public thank you. And I applaud you for your indispensable contribution to this underexamined issue of women's equity and religious freedom. Your voice has been a seminal one. I have drawn upon it heavily in formal and informal discussions with my colleagues, most especially your 2013 UN report on this issue. Religion matters, and it matters deeply. And because religion matters, so must religious freedom. Let us stand together, break bread together, and engage in this common struggle for human rights so that we may, in the words of that late Senator Robert F. Kennedy, make gentle the life of this world. Thank you.
Well, I'm afraid that we've been enriched by these discussions, but we're also out of time, so I'm afraid we're not going to be able to do questions afterwards. The next sessions will be starting in 10 or 15, theoretically in 10 minutes, probably in 15, but we urge you to go on to the next. But join me again in thanking this wonderful panel.